So maybe the next slide, I'll provide a little bit of context for the discussion before I hand things over to Lucas. So for those who are maybe joining us for the first time, the Technology Innovation and Emissions Reduction Regulation, or TIER, is Alberta's industrial carbon pricing and emissions trading system. The TIER aggregate program was established in 2020 in response to the introduction of the federal fuel charge. The program is a voluntary program and has financially shielded conventional oil and gas industry from the full coverage of the federal fuel charge. So that's been roughly $500 million to over $1 billion annually from 2020 through 2024 and part of 2025. So while it's done that, the TIER program has also maintained a marginal price signal to incentivize emissions reduction. And the program has typically collected about $50 million annually into the Alberta TIER Fund, as well as other compliance activities. So as of the 1st of April 2025, the federal fuel charge was eliminated, and that marks a important shift in the program and how COG emissions are managed. That's also why we don't have our federal colleagues with us today, as we have often in our fall webinars in previous years. So looking ahead, changes in sector coverage within the Alberta aggregate program are expected, which is part of what we're going to talk about today, and which is likely to pose challenges for us to maintain representative benchmarks for aggregates. So we recognize that stakeholders have been waiting for updates to the TIER regulation and standards. The purpose of today's webinar is to share some key information on the aggregate enrollment and aggregate benchmarking to support decisions that people maybe need to make in terms of participation in 2025, 2026, and beyond. We won't be covering any information or specifics around direct investment today. And again, to reiterate, the participation in the aggregate program has always been and will continue to be a voluntary participation. So now I'd like to turn it over to Lucas, who will go through a little bit the agenda that we're going to cover in today's session.
Thank you, John. My name is Lucas Zhang. I'm the director of the Conventional Oil and Gas Aggregate Program. So regarding the agenda, we'll begin with an overview of the aggregate program objectives, as we typically do. Next, we'll cover updates on aggregate enrollment and dive into the 2025 and 2026 facility-specific benchmark approaches, which are the focus of today's presentation. After that, we'll talk about how stakeholders can provide feedback to the department, and we'll hold a Q&A session right after the presentation. In case you're wondering, or trying to remember, or for those folks who are new online, since 2020, the Conventional Oil and Gas Aggregate Program has enabled regulated facilities to apply for exemption from the federal fuel charge and maintained industry competitiveness and provincial jurisdiction over industrial emissions. The federal fuel charge, as John previously alluded to, was ended as of April the 1st, 2025. However, the program continues to allow voluntary enrollment with compliance requirements, incentivize emissions reduction by enabling aggregate facilities to earn EPCs, emissions performance credits, through verifiable improvements in facility performance. As of this year, we have over 59,000 facilities enrolled in the program through 281 aggregate facilities, and this may change for 2026 and maybe 2025 as well. So now let's move on to enrollment updates. As most of you know, earlier in September, an announcement has been made to amend the TIER regulation for 2025. Updates to the TIER regulation are anticipated to allow aggregate facilities to apply to have their aggregate facility designation revoked for 2025. The anticipated application deadline is December 31st, 2025, or submit a partial year compliance report for January the 1st to March 31st, 2025, with the report still due at the same deadline of June 30th, 2026, and opt out for 2026 at the same time. The anticipated application deadline with the opt-out form is December 1st, 2025, for the partial reporting option where aggregates are exiting the program for 2026. Verifiers may request an exemption from the maximum of 5 verifications requirement in the tier verification standard per Part 1, Section 5C of the verification, validation, and auditing standard, or have their aggregate facility designation revoked for 2026 using the same application form, which is the simplified application form. The application deadline is December 1st, 2025, which is already in the regulation. To facilitate the opt-out process, as most of you know, the department has emailed stakeholders an opt-out application form. Please complete and submit the opt-out application form to epa.ghg@gov.ab.ca. Reply to the email with the attached Excel form, please, and not the PDF for tracking purposes. Signatures can be made digitally in the Excel form or as a separate attached PDF, though. The form is simplified to include both 2025 and 2026 options. Applications for aggregate facility designation, revocation, or partial year reporting for 2025 will not be processed or approved until appropriate amendments to the tier regulation are made. It is worth noting that opted out aggregates remain opted out unless re-enrolled. The enrollment deadline remains November 15th, 2026 for 2026 reporting, so there's no change. If an aggregate facility opts out and later re-enrolls in tier as a new aggregate facility, its previous reference years may still be acceptable. For example, if the re-enrolled aggregate is the same as or a smaller part of the previous one, the previous reference years would likely be acceptable. However, significant population changes may trigger reassessment of reference years. For aggregate facilities that are staying in tier, Government of Canada has notified stakeholders of the changes to the federal fuel charge, and the relevant questions should be directed to Government of Canada. There's no major changes to tier aggregate enrollment processes, so companies can continue adding or removing conventional oil and gas facilities from an aggregate, as well as creating or revoking an aggregate. Government of Alberta will continue to send out confirmation regulation letters without CCing Government of Canada going forward. Now let's dive into the details of zero emitting facilities and their impact on benchmarking. In the next few minutes, I'll walk you through some slides based on what we communicated earlier this year at the February 28th workshop. First, let's revisit the definition of zero emitting facilities, or ZEF for short. A zero emitting facility or zero emitter in the context of tier aggregate program is a Petronex facility based on Petronex ID, whose combined fuel and flare volumes, including purchased fuel gas, which is typically reported in Section B2 as non-Petronex emissions. But if the Petronex ID and data are provided, we could include those in this zero emitting facility determination. Constitute less than 0.5% of the aggregate facility's total fuel and flare volumes, and whose fuel and flare volume intensity is significantly lower than the aggregate facility's intensity in 2025 and the reference years on average. So it's quite a mouthful, but the definition is consistent with 2024 and is now articulated with increased precision and clarity. For example, here's a screenshot of a zero emitter. It's a gas gathering system in this case, and this GS facility reports DISP and REC volumetric data into Petronex, but there's no fuel or flare data. I'll explain why this matters in a moment. So to illustrate how a zero emitting facility could cause issues, let's assume that we have an aggregate with 4 batteries, well batteries, located in 2 gas fields. The emission intensity with hypothetical numbers is at 0.5 0.050 in year 1, and in year 2, they ramped up the production volumes. However, since everything is scaled up evenly, the emissions intensity did not change and it was still at 0.050. But if we tweak the scenario for year 2 a bit, the operator decided to add a gas gathering system to connect the two fields in response to the increased production volumes. The aggregate's emissions intensity would be cut in half to 0.025 as the denominator volumes are now double counted. So if the FSB or the facility-specific benchmark for year 2 was based on year 1's data, there would be an accounting consistency or fair comparison issue between benchmarking and reporting, as the decrease of the aggregate emissions intensity was not due to demonstrable facility improvements or emissions reduction activities. Now that we have covered the zero emitting facility issues, let's move on to the 2025 benchmark standard updates. The 2025 FSB approach will focus on addressing the ZEF, or zero emitting facility, impacts associated with the following facility types: gas gathering system, GS, pipeline, tank terminal, metering station, injection/disposal facility, customer trading facility, and water source. The ZEF treatment for 2025 SBs and reporting will be very similar to the ZEF treatment for 2024 facility-specific benchmarks, and will be fully implemented across all aggregates. To ensure consistent comparison with the 2025 FSB, report production accounting volumes for the ZEF facilities specified in the FSB letter at 0 in the 2025 compliance report. 2025 ZEF treatment process for both default and BM benchmark application would follow these steps. First, we identify the zero emitting facility from each aggregate's 2025 confirmation regulation facility list. Then we subtract the ZEF production accounting volumes and only the production accounting volumes. So we'll leave the emissions alone, same as 2024 from the annual total volumes. Assess the difference between intensity ratios calculated with and without ZEF production accounting volumes. The ratio of 2025 volume intensity is defined as the combined volume of fuel and flare in 2025 divided by the 2025 production accounting volume to the volume intensity of the reference years, with both intensities calculated using the 2025 confirmation regulation facility list. The threshold for changing a benchmark unit, if the intensity ratios show 5% or more up or down difference before and after ZEF treatments or adjustments, would consider switching the benchmark unit to production where possible, and to ensure fairness, we'd want to see correlation results be better or comparable based on production, and no significant volumes that are associated and well correlated with significant emissions are missed. Otherwise, we'd consider using REC or disposition, excluding specific production volumes for the ZEF facilities. For this round of standard updates, we are also adding more details on the interpretation of Pearson correlation coefficient R. Same as before, R is used to assess the selection of a representative benchmark unit and a set of reference years for an aggregate. Annual data points, where appropriate, may be used when instead of the monthly data, when the monthly data indicate strong seasonality. R is very useful, but not the only metric for evaluating benchmark units and reference years. The benchmark unit must be representative of the aggregate facilities composition, configuration, and emissions in the reference years and subsequent reporting years. Correlation strength categories include weak, moderate, strong, and very strong, corresponding to absolute values of R less than 0.3, between 0.3 and 0.5, between 0.5 and 0.7, and greater than or equal to 0.7 respectively. Two correlation coefficients that differ by 0.2 or less are generally considered to be comparable in strength. A benchmark unit with the strongest positive R is generally preferred, taking into consideration of the aggregate's composition, configuration, and emissions characteristics. Now let's dive into the nitty-gritty details of low-emitting facilities and their impact on benchmarking. So this probably or might be the first time that you ever heard about this concept like zero-emitting facility. We have a new definition for low-emitting facilities, or LEF for short, and this definition does not apply to 2025 FSBs, but will apply to 2026 FSBs. A low-emitting facility is defined as a Petrex facility, again based on Petrex ID, inclusive of all facility types, including well batteries, whose combined fuel and flare volumes, again, these volumes would include purchased fuel gas if provided, average less than 500 E3M3 across the reference years. So to calculate if the facility is meeting the threshold, you would sum up the volumes for all the reference years and then divide by the number of reference years. The well battery example in this in the table here reported about 0.2 E3M3 fuel each month for 5 months from November to March inclusive in the past few years. I understand there are many more scenarios in which a Petrex facility may have emitted less than 500 E3M3 on average in the reference years, and we'll talk about how the threshold was selected in a few slides. So like the first example about the impact of new zero emitting facilities, existing facilities with varying levels of emissions intensity can impact an aggregate's overall intensity as well. In the example shown here, we are comparing the effects of even and uneven scaling of existing facilities. In year 1, the aggregate facility's emissions intensity was 0.03. In year 2, under 0.1, both emissions and production scaled up evenly across the aggregate, resulting in the same emissions intensity of 0.03. In scenario 2 of year 2, however, the aggregate exhibited uneven scaling, meaning the emissions and production doubled for the bottom 3 facilities in this table, while the top 3 facilities remained unchanged from year 1. Unlike scenario 1, the aggregate emissions intensity in scenario 2 decreased despite no change in the individual emissions intensities of the COG or conventional oil gas or Petrex facilities. So to summarize, both ZEF, which is zero emitting facility, and LEF, low emitting facility, can dilute an aggregate's emissions intensity without demonstrable or significant facility improvements, i.e. the emissions would remain at 0 or very low. The dilutive effects can be due to inconsistent production accounting between reference years and the reporting year, new ZEF or LEF facilities that were not operational, meaning there's no data available in Petrex for those years in the reference years, unfair comparison among facility types with varying levels of emissions intensity when an aggregate exhibits uneven scaling, operational changes, or product changes relative to reference years. The dilutive effects could be magnified in the 2026 reporting period due to the increased flexibility in aggregate enrollment stemming from the federal fuel charge having been zeroed out. As promised, I'll explain how the low emitting facility threshold of 500 E3M3 by volume was selected. Here's a chart that shows the distribution of conventional oil and gas facilities by fuel and flare volume levels. In the aggregate program, as of compliance year 2024, ZEF and LEF account for 90% of the approximately 20,000 conventional oil and gas facilities that have Petrex data. Low emitting facilities or LEFs account for 12% of the program's total fuel and flare volumes, yet represent 46% of total production volumes. This indicates that LEFs generally exhibit lower emissions intensity. However, due to their relatively small contribution to overall emissions, they tend to introduce more analytical noise than meaningful signal in emissions performance assessments. I'll elaborate on the implications in the next slide. Our team has conducted many simulations to identify and confirm the dilutive effects. The simulation results and the facility distribution chart indicate that the aggregate program would be streamlined while while maintaining meaningful, about 88% emissions coverage if we focus on the largest, about approximately 10% of the conventional oil and gas facilities. The dilutive effects of the large number of zero-emitting and low-emitting facilities can be significantly mitigated if the production accounting volumes, i.e. the denominator volumes, are excluded from benchmarking and reporting. Benchmarking by facility type, well batteries, gas gathering system, gas plants, etc., would help to address the uneven scaling and unfair comparison issues among facility types. Moving on to benchmark standard updates for the 2026 reporting year. First of all, to reiterate, the tier aggregate program objectives for 2026 and onwards are to allow voluntary enrollment with compliance requirements, incentivize emissions reduction by enrolling aggregate facilities to earn emissions performance credits through verifiable improvements in facility performance. The dilutive effects could be magnified in the 2026 reporting period due to the increased flexibility in aggregate enrollment stemming from the FFC or federal fuel charge having been zeroed out. The 2026 FSB approach is projected to offer EPC opportunities comparable to those in 2024 while incorporating measures to mitigate the impact of dilutive effects. In the absence of federal fuel charge, the 2026 FSB approach will differ significantly from previous years due to the challenges associated with zero-emitting and low-emitting facilities that we discussed earlier. With the 2026 FSB approach, one FSB will be assigned to each facility type, such as well batteries and gas plants, with a minimum emissions threshold using the volume as a surrogate. So it's the E3M3 unit is not emissions, but it's a very good surrogate. 500 E3M3 fuel plus flare volumes, which is the average in the reference years, applied to each Petronex ID or Petronex facility. This approach mitigates the dilutive effects linked to ZEF, LEF, and uneven scaling across various facility types. And it offers similar EPC opportunities compared to 2024, upfront analysis and optimization of facilities within an aggregate can result in leaner, more stable aggregates and improved visibility into projected FSBs. All Petronex emissions data in this 2026 FSB approach will be included in both benchmarking and reporting. LEF, which by definition includes ZEF, sometimes I say both LEF and ZEF, but LEF would include ZEF as well. Production accounting data, which again is the denominator volumes when we calculate the emissions intensity, will be excluded from benchmarking and reporting. The compliance and FSB application forms, of course, will be revised accordingly. To provide insight into our team's EPC simulation results using the 2026 FSB approach based on the 2024 Petronex data, the bar chart on this slide illustrates the percentage breakdown of fuel and flare volumes along with simulated EPCs, emissions performance credits, categorized by facility type. Approximately half of the EPC potential is attributed to well batteries, followed by gas gathering systems at around 30%. The remaining facility types collectively account for roughly 1%. Except for gas plants, the EPC potential aligns well with the shares of fuel and flare volumes for well batteries, gas gathering systems, and other facility types. Our team has analyzed the Petronex data for the common facility types in the aggregate program and confirmed that most well batteries don't have received volumes. Most gas gathering systems, custom trading facilities, tank terminals, injection facilities, pipelines, and metering stations don't have production volumes. And most injection facilities don't have disposition volumes reported in Petronex. So typically, receipts is not representative for well batteries, production not for gas gathering systems, custom traders, tank terminals, injection facilities, pipelines, or metering stations. Disposition is not typically not good for injection facilities. Default option 1 units, therefore, will be production for batteries, well batteries, and receipts for GS, GPC, TTM, IF, PL, MS, unless significant differences are found between the options available, which is shown in green color in the table for each facility type. But of course, the list of facility types in this table is not exhaustive. For other facility types, benchmark units may be assessed on a case-by-case basis. For example, for waste plants, there could be strong seasonality in the monthly data for a waste plant. So annual data in this case would be appropriate for correlation analysis using an option 2 unit, such as disposition to non-op or external facilities. We understand that this multi-unit approach adds complexity. However, we believe the added complexity can be mitigated through automation, supporting efficient implementation of the 2026 FSB approach. And the 2026 compliance reporting process would be similar to 2024. I'll share some preliminary thinking around the 2026 compliance form towards the end of the slide deck. Same as before, we will have a reference year period of 2 to 3 years for 2026 FSBs. The pre-existing reference years will be adopted where appropriate, and the Pearson correlation coefficient R will continue to support the reference year selection process. The production accounting volumes, which again, denominator volumes only, for all low emitting facilities, including those without Petrox data in the reference years, i.e. new facilities, will be excluded from benchmarking and reporting due to the minimum emissions threshold, which is average across the reference years. If there's no data in the reference years, the average would be 0. This ensures a consistent comparison of emissions performance across the same cohort of conventional oil and gas facilities or Petrox facilities between the reference years and the reporting year. And this would promote leaner and more stable aggregates and improved visibility into the projected FSBs if stakeholders are interested in doing forecasting. To support the participation of new facilities for EPC opportunities, we would consider adding a more recent year to the reference years, so still maximum 3 years, so that the new facilities could have sufficient data and meet the threshold of 500 E3M3, or creating a new aggregate for the new facilities with new reference years, again, 1 year prior and 2 subsequent years with the default set of reference years. The increased admin costs associated with creating new aggregates can be offset by additional EPC opportunities. This ensures more comparable and cohort-consistent emissions benchmarks. Newly built sites, however, is an interesting topic. If the newly built sites demonstrate innovation and best-in-class performance, they may be included within an existing aggregate to support comparison against the legacy facility cohort. Non-Petrox emissions will be excluded from benchmarking for each facility type by default. There has been or could be significant changes to some aggregates drilling and completion programs. Some aggregates drilling and completion program may have halted, or the drilling and completion may have shifted to a different region or different regions that have or lack natural advantages. By natural advantages, I mean well pressure. Some wells have high enough pressure, the oil and gas just flow, while others need energy input to pull those products out of the ground. Or the levels of tier enrolment for new drilling and completion sites may have plummeted. We would consider, however, a new benchmark metric for drilling and completion if needed, such as per meters drilled, attributing non-drilling and completion emissions associated with some facilities that have Petrox IDs, for example, purchased fuel gas for some terminals, to conventional oil and gas facilities if verified data is provided. Instead of preparing separate ICAST or I calculations for each facility type within aggregate for the 2026 FSB approach, and given that most aggregates for 2026 are expected to become smaller, we plan to implement the default FSB form approach to improve efficiency and ensure consistency. The default FSB form method would extract data for the reference years from previously verified benchmark applications, if available, and compliance reports, if conventional oil and gas site or facility is in the 2026 confirmation regulation facility list. Otherwise, it would apply default emission factors to Petronex fuel and flare volumes for the conventional oil and gas facility or facilities in the reference years. The same emission factors should be used in the report to ensure a fair comparison. It is essentially a simplified FSB application form. So this default FSB form method is essentially a simplified FSB application form filled out by the department, which preserves GHG quantification methodology choices at the COG level or conventional oil and gas facility level, increases transparency and streamlines calculations with COG level volumes and methodologies in one form. It becomes more practical and beneficial with the expectation that the aggregates would mainly be shrinking. We understand that the 2026 default FSB framework would not cover all scenarios, so stakeholders are encouraged to reach out to the department regarding any flaring or SFC emission reduction efforts or investments that are not reflected in the default benchmarking framework. Data submissions for the following scenarios may be incorporated into default benchmarking, such as engineered emissions reduction and transformational innovation. For 2026 FSB applications, the applications should follow the same benchmarking approach as default FSBs regarding zero emitting facilities, low emitting facilities, benchmark units, reference years, and non-Petronex emissions. The vision for the 2026 FSB application form. So to shed some light on what we are thinking about this form, the 2026 form would largely maintain a consistent look and feel with the 2024 version, with automatic detection of facility types in sections B1 and B6, and section B2 will be modified. Some ideas include to include Petronex IDs where appropriate, or some information regarding drilling and completion benchmark units if desired. And for non-Petronex, non-electricity purchase fuel gas, we would be leaning toward having those reported in section B1 because the Petronex IDs are already in section B1, and the methodology selection and the species by species emissions are already in the form section B1. Section E could be duplicated for each facility type with automatic calculations. So the extra work would be minimized for reporters or whoever prepares the FSB application forms. The 2025 FSB application form with corrections to reduction targets may be used to project 2026 FSBs with one facility type at a time, because the 2025 form does not enable sub-aggregate FSB calculations for all the facility types within an aggregate until the 2026 form is released. Regarding the 2026 compliance report form, it will largely be the same form as well compared to 2024, except that section B6 will have multiple rows for sub-aggregate FSBs. And also the form would have automatic detection of facility type and calculation of facility type totals, which would allow calculations or determination of different allowable emissions for each facility type. Some changes are also expected for section B2, but overall speaking, the changes to the compliance report form would be very minimal, and the impact on reporters would be inputting multiple FSBs or sub-aggregate FSBs instead of just one FSB for the entire aggregates in section B6. Here's a summary of key deadlines you may find helpful to keep on hand. November 15th, 2025, adding facilities for 2025 reporting, and then there's the deadlines and anticipated deadlines for 2025 partial reporting, 2025 FSB application, benchmark unit or reference year requests, 2025 opt-out applications, 2026 removing facilities for 2026 reporting, adding facilities, creating a new aggregate for 2026 reporting, removing facilities for 2027 reporting, and 2026 FSB application, as well as change of benchmark unit or reference year requests. Feedback on the 2025 and 2026 FSB approaches may be submitted to the general inbox at epa.ghg@gov.ab.ca by November 12, 2025. The benchmark standards, after incorporating feedbacks, will be updated this fall for both 2025 and 2026 FSB methodologies. That's the end of the presentation. Now we are open for questions.
Thanks so much, Lucas. And if people wanted us to go over any particular slide, like please feel free to post that in the Q&A. Also, if you'd like us to go back and look at any of those pieces one more time. We've got one question here. If zero emitting facilities, low emitting facility emissions are included in benchmarking, but their production is excluded, would it be better for operators to simply remove these sites from the aggregate? I think that decision is certainly being left to the operators. I think in the case where the those emissions from those zero emitting or low emitting facilities are static or not dropping, there could be a benefit to leave them out of the aggregate. Here's another question. These changes discussed for 2026, are they published? If not, when will they be published? Please publish as soon as possible to ensure that we can meet the November 12th feedback deadline. Yep, so we're hoping to post the slides for this, and maybe we could even see if there's a way, I don't know, Lucas, maybe if there's a way that we can PDF the slides and distribute them through this meeting itself. I'm not sure, but we'll try to get the slides available in short order so that people can have those when they look to develop their feedback.
Yeah, we'll talk about which way is faster and more efficient, perhaps, and then one way or another, we'll get the slides posted or sent out.
A question here. I'm not sure if I heard it correctly earlier. If an operator wants to partially opt out for 2025 and fully opt out for 2026, can we use one application form for this, or do we need to submit two? I think that scenario is covered in the form that was distributed, Lucas, but can you confirm or someone else confirm?
Yes. Yeah, the partial reporting operation indicates that it's a full opt-out for 2026 as well. So partial reporting for January to March, with the report due at the same deadline, June 30th of the next year, indicate that the aggregate would be opting out for 2026 as well. So it's just three options. This, I think, the partial reporting option indicates a full opt-out for 2026.
We've got a question here, which is a bit of a repeated one of the ones that was published, I think. So if a company opts out for 2025 under tier, will it be charged federal fuel carbon tax for January to April 2025? That's a question for CRA. So like we don't have a visibility into what the response would be in terms of your exemption for a full year opt-out. That's why we've left the two options, and folks can work that out for themselves in terms of what makes the most sense for them. Can you clarify the treatment of non-Petronex emissions being excluded from the FSB calculation on slide 33? Will all aggregate FSBs be adjusted to remove this? And will these emissions no longer be part of the TRE for compliance reporting? And does this apply to all non-Petronex emissions or only drilling and completion emissions? Sometimes drilling and completion emissions are reported in Petronex. So I'll give a little bit of context, and then Lucas, maybe you can flesh this out. I guess one of the reasons that we're looking at this is that we observe, I guess, that people have the ability to exclude facilities where drilling and completion activities are anticipated under the aggregate program, since there's no federal fuel charge. So we're expecting that the actual amount of drilling and completion that will be in any compliance period will probably be fairly limited, and so we're looking to take that out of the correspondingly take that out of the benchmark calculation. The definition of stationary fuel combustion and flaring haven't changed, and so if there is stationary fuel combustion to support drilling and completion at a site that is still within the aggregate for a compliance year, that would still be part of the compliance reporting.
Yeah, thank you, John. I
There's
think
some
you covered
pieces
it.
that I didn't address there, Lucas. I don't know if you wanted to, in terms of like this question of whether or not the all non-Petronex fuels are being considered versus just drilling and completion.
So by default, all non-Petronex emissions, unless it's fuel gas, for example, that's associated with the Petronex facility, but due to its purchased fuel gas, it may be reported in the section B2 instead of section B1. So the intention is to, and maybe I'll talk about the limitation that we have or lack of alignment sight to the granularity regarding non-Petronex emissions, especially for drilling and completion emissions. I do understand that drilling and completion emissions are maybe difficult to be separated by Petronex ID or conventional oil and gas sites because typically they are combined together in receipts. So for other emissions, there could be electricity-related emissions in section B2. Non-Petronex emissions could be non-electricity related fuel gas consumed in a similar fashion to those for facilities in section B1 regarding fuel gas. So those ones that we'd like to consider if the data is provided, of course, consider those fuel gas as very similar to just the typical fuel gas in Petronex, even though they are purchased fuel gas and not reported into Petronex. So by default, we would exclude all the non-Petronex emissions for benchmarking. However, again, if you provide us data, we can consider those. As I mentioned, the non-drilling completion emissions. So regarding drilling completion, inherently, so if there's flaring emissions reported to Petronex, then those by definition would be part of TRE as well. I don't think the intention was to separate those out, but that's something we can look into and consider the impacts. So for drilling completion itself, in the section B2 section, all the emissions, drilling completion emissions reported in section B2, I think it makes more sense to separate those out from the benchmarking and possibly be assigned a separate metric for evaluating drilling completion emissions intensity. So whether we include some of the Petronex data as well into the drilling completion benchmark development, that's something we can continue explore. We haven't really found a very straightforward approach to developing drilling completion benchmark metrics, and we are willing to hear more from stakeholders. So feel free to send us an email with more questions on that regard. Yeah.
Thanks, Lucas. So if an aggregate facility chooses to opt out, do we still need to change verifiers to verify the January to March emissions and denominator? So this is, I guess, many aggregates having come in with 2020 are hitting the kind of 5-year interval on verification. So can you update on that?
Oh, one second. So repeat the question again. So I was trying to type.
Yeah, no worries. I think the question is essentially related to people hitting their 5-year verification limit, and is there some latitude that we might have if they're opting out for
Yeah,
2026?
thank you. So on the slide, we mentioned that if if an aggregate chooses the partial year reporting option, which means reporting on January to March, and with the report due at the same time for the as the full year reporting, June 30th, 2026, for 2025 partial reporting as well. So with that option, and for the aggregates that are exiting for 2026, the verifiers per the verification standard can request for deviation to the 5 consecutive year limitation or requirements. So I can draft a letter and have it signed and approved. Please do note that the verifier may have multiple clients, so feel free to put one request together for all the verification reports that meet the criteria, which means the criteria of 2025 partial year reporting and full exit for 2026.
Thank you. Can you clarify, are you saying that it is optional to include non-Petronex fuel from drilling and completion for 2025 onwards as the FFC is no longer in effect? Do we need to consider that FFC was applicable in the first quarter of the rest of the year? So yeah, just to clarify, I think we're not saying that. So like, it's not optional to include drilling and completion emissions in your compliance reporting for facilities that are within the aggregate. I think what we are saying is that for 2026 onwards, we're looking to exclude non-Petronex fuels from the benchmark setting, except in specific situations where some of those fuels, which aren't used for drilling and completion, can be associated with individual facilities. I'm just looking at this one. I saw this on the website under proposed amendments. Can you expand on this option? Oh, okay. Yeah. So no, we're not talking about direct investment today. Will multiple aggregates still be allowed for one company to go forward? I think the answer is yes. Given the federal OBPS program has a threshold of 50,000 tons and tier only requires you to report if you're over 100,000 tons, voluntary if below, have there been discussions with the federal government on whether tier is still seen as an equivalent program? So that has not come up to this at this point in terms of there being a federal concern on coverage or scope related to the 100,000 tons. But again, I think there's probably more conversations to be had with the federal government as they kind of move through their 2026 process on reconfirming the federal benchmark. Okay, so another, I guess, question on the verification. So to reiterate, if an aggregate is reporting for partial year 2025, and exiting the program for 2026, the verifier for the aggregate can request to carry on to do the partial year verification for 2025, even if they're beyond the, if that puts them beyond the 5-year limit. For 2025, for aggregates reporting partial years, January to March, will the full year be used for the FSB or the partial year relating to the first quarter? I believe our intention is to use the full historic data for the full year benchmarking periods. Is there a risk for opting out of tier? Different benchmark options. Have you had discussions with the federal government? No, I think we haven't got clarity from the federal government on that. We've left the option to opt out entirely or to report for the partial year. And so that, I guess, is something for the aggregates to consider in terms of risk and benefit. Will existing EPCs and emission offset credits remain valid if opting out is enacted? Yeah. So basically, there's no limitation in terms of what parties can hold emissions performance credits or emission offset credits within the tier system. So there's no issue in terms of those credits that you might hold remaining valid if you decide to opt out. Is the intention of the department to effectively force all operators out of tier for 2026 due to the complexity of the new framework that is being announced only 1 month prior to the opt-out deadline of December 1st, 2025? No, that's not the intention. I think as Lucas mentioned earlier, people absolutely, like if you feel you need more time to fully evaluate your options, you have the ability to opt out for 2026 and reapply to bring a either the same or a subset of your aggregate forward by November 15th, I believe, right, of 2026. So like if you're feeling like you don't have enough time to make this decision, I think that fully maintains your optionality if you want to soak on this until November of next year. Just looking what else we've got here. Can you clarify what you're defining as best in class on slide 32? Zero emitting facilities and low emitting facilities are excluded from your aggregate, but if you can prove best in class, you're allowed to have them added back into your aggregate. For example, if all new well site batteries are being built with no pneumatic venting or flaring, this would be considered best in class compared to existing legacy sites. Are you able to add in all of your new zero emitting, low emitting new batteries or electric compressors sites back into the aggregate? I think just to clarify a couple things. So like that evaluation of low emitting facilities is looking back in time at the benchmark years. And so if there's been a change in practice in order to improve the emissions performance at those sites, and they weren't low emitting facilities at the during the benchmark period, like that's already fully captured. I think what we are talking about there is primarily probably directed at new facilities in terms of being able to bring new facilities that are kind of demonstrably best in class into a potentially into an existing aggregate. I think probably we're still thinking through some of the criteria there. What you mentioned in terms of electrification is probably something that we might be considering, but I think that's an area where we'd like to hear people's feedback if you have some by November 12th in terms of like in your perspective what ought to be considered in that best in class determination. Is that okay, Lucas?
That sounds really good. Yeah, so if it's electric compressor, I understand that's not so common and also would be considered, I think, transformational innovation, I guess. For batteries, we need to look at the details because there are batteries that are just naturally advantaged, so they don't have to uh, input much energy to produce oil and gas. And then there are others that required engineering designs and investments into bring the emissions down compared to alternative solutions. So yeah, so feel free to reach out with more details and we can discuss further.
Question about remaining credits after opt-out. What would be an example of what those credits could be used for? Is the only remaining option to sell them on the market? So credits under tier have a 5-year expiry period. Certainly, people could hold them if they wished, keeping in mind the expiry. I think the obvious option for sure would be to sell them back into the tier market. You're also, I guess, free to look for non-tier buyers of those credits if somebody has a voluntary purpose for corporate reporting or other things. But I think the most likely pathway would be to sell them into the tier market at a timing of your choosing, keeping in consideration the expiry. If there is a delay beyond 2025 for the tier amendments, how are operators who request to withdraw to ensure compliance with tier? So I think basically I would say if you have requested to exit tier for 2026, that was an existing ability under the existing regulation. So if things end up delayed around the 2025 options, we would still execute your request to exit the program for 2026. Really, for 2025, obviously the compliance deadline is still June 30th, 2026. So I think we don't anticipate the regulations being published into 2026, but there's still a fair window of time before the compliance deadline for 2025. Could you explain how the 500 E3M3 per year threshold was derived? Were typical combustion emission sources at upstream oil and gas batteries factored in? I don't know, Lucas, if you wanted to go over that a slide again. I mean, I think primarily it's a population analysis, but.
So regarding the 500 E3M3 per year threshold, all the emissions, so basically Petronex emissions, not really the non-Petronex emissions because we don't really have the line of sight to divide the non-Petronex emissions by Petronex ID. So the analysis was based on the Petronex data that's available and based on the 2024 confirmation regulation facilities. So all of the facilities in the 2024 confirmation of regulation facilities for all the aggregates in 2024 or for the 2024 compliance year were included. And so the data were extracted from Petronex and we looked at the fuel and flare volumes. So were typical combustion emission sources at upstream oil and gas batteries factored in? So all the emissions that are in scope other than non-Petronex drilling completion, for example, or even purchased fuel gas or fuel gas used for electricity generation, those were not included. So basically the section B1 data, which includes SFC and the flaring volumes, were included in this analysis.
Thanks, Lucas. For the 2025 compliance data, how should it be determined what non-Petronex fuel needs to be included since the exemption certificates were not used after April 1st, 2025? So if you're, I guess, taking the decision to report partial year for 2025, the non-Petronex fuels should be like those fuels that were, I guess, consumed during that quarter. So like from January through to the end of March would be essentially the time frame that you're reporting on. So the non-Petronex fuels you should include would be those fuels that were consumed in that time frame. If it's probably reasonable and conservative to include fuels that were purchased in that time frame if that's something that you have a clearer record of, I guess. But.
So, John, just to clarify, if an aggregate chooses to do the full year reporting for 2025, then all the non-Petronex emissions or all the emissions in scope, in the tier scope for the aggregate program would have to be reported for the entire year, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Perhaps that was the nature of the question. Yeah. So if you're doing full year reporting for 2025, I guess the full year's worth of non-Petronex fuel should be included.
Only for the sites that are already registered in the program.
Yeah. Yeah. If an aggregate decides to stay in tier, is there any reason other than composition change and zero emitting facility, low emitting facility adjustments that might trigger an FSB update? How about with drilling and completion of fuels that might have inflated an aggregate's FSBs within the threshold? Will their FSB be adjusted given that the department was aware of these volumes based on the annual submissions? So I think, in short, the intention probably is to recompute all of the FSBs for 2026, given that we have a new rule set, maintaining the same benchmark periods where appropriate. But do you have anything else to respond to that one, Lucas?
Yeah, so maybe just to clarify, maybe the question is for both 2025 FSB and 2026, and the answers will be different, of course.
Right.
So for, yeah, because there's a full year 2025 exit, but maybe I'll try to tackle both. So for 2025, ZEF is relevant and the LEF is not relevant. So the low emitting facility approach is only applicable to the 2026 FSBs. And for the ZEF treatment, it will be very similar to the 2024 implemented across the aggregates. So other than the ZEF / LEF adjustments, what might trigger an FSB update? So typically for 2025 and previous years, the ICAST over I was designed to take into consideration or address the population change impact. So population changes, changes methodologies, other things, as usual, like would trigger an FSB update, and that's probably why that is why we do annual FSB evaluation, given that populations may change every year. And then there are other things that could change, like reference years and the benchmark units as well. So the ZEF / LEF treatments would be part of the 2025 and 2026 respectively. Drilling completion fuels that might have inflated an existing aggregates FSB. So far we haven't looked into or compared how the drilling completion program for an aggregate has changed or not changed. So drilling completion is not treated separately as part of the population adjustment or annual FSB calculations. So most likely for 2025, we'll continue to do this. And for 2026, as you know, as alluded to or explained in the slides, the drilling completion fields would be excluded from benchmarking by default unless a request is submitted, perhaps for a separate metric to evaluate drilling completion intensities. Will their FSB be adjusted given that AEPA was aware of those volumes based on the annual submissions? Are we aware of the volumes? Yeah, so for diesel, Alberta diesel, propane, things like that, we are aware of the volumes. However, we don't have the granularity to separate those volumes by Petrox ID. That means if the population changes, it becomes very difficult for us to determine whether those volumes are still relevant to the most recent population of an aggregate. But things are changing for 2026, as I alluded to.
Yeah, and just to highlight, really, like the context is partly what's driving that change for 2026. Like our expectation is that the coverage of drilling completion emissions in the compliance reporting for 2025 will be substantially complete, whereas for 2026, the optionality to include or not include individual COG sites means that we expect that probably doesn't hold for 2026. So it's really that change in context which is driving some of the updates for 2026.
Thank you, John.
If aggregate exits in 2026 and reports a partial year for 2025, will we still be allowed to fulfill any obligations with up to 80% credit? Yep, that's correct. There's no change in the compliance optionality for part year reporting for 2025. Can you clarify what the reference years will be for new benchmarks in 2026? So I think in general, they'll be the same years where the aggregate is maintaining its participation in the program. How would the recently shut-in facilities be treated if they were operational in benchmark years? I think shut-in facilities, unless they're removed from your aggregate, would generally be still included in the compliance reporting, right? And in the benchmarking.
Yep.
Okay, when is the deadline to opt out for 2026? I believe it's December 1st, correct?
December 1st, yeah, it's already in the current regulation. So by removing all the facilities in aggregate, submitting a removal facilities application, an aggregate could be opting out for 2026 using the existing method. However, for 2025, it's different. But for 2026, the avenue is already there.
And for 2026, for ease of, is the 2026 only opt-out enabled in the form that we sent around for, I guess, ease of filing, or?
Yeah, for simplicity, the opt-out form also includes the option to opt out for 2026.
So we would be essentially doing, as you described, a removal of all of the sites from the aggregate after we'd finalized the 2025 population, if you've requested to opt out for 2026.
Exactly. So that saves person responsible or facility some time instead of having to find the exact list and fill out a removal of facility form. Using the simplified opt-out form would be just easier for everybody to ensure a complete and a clean opt-out or deregistration of an aggregate.
Hey, there's a question here around, I guess, emissions coverage and scope in tier compliance, with the suggestion that some people might be venting so that they don't have to um, pay tier compliance charges. So, like, I think there's no current intention to expand the aggregate program beyond stationary fuel combustion and flaring, at the moment, at least. And that one's repeat, I think. I noticed that Teams didn't allow attendees to copy the live transcript, and I wanted to ask if it would be possible to receive a copy of the full transcript or caption file once it's available. I understand that only the organizers access to the saved transcript. Yeah, I think if we get permission to publish the recording, we should also be able to make the transcript available, I think. So that should be fine. Um, there are some facilities that report fuel for electricity generation under activity disposition to ABCO or ABEG. Could you clarify that the associated emissions from these volumes can be kept in the 2026 benchmarking? So I think this falls into the non-drilling completion with kind of evidence of association with an individual facility. Is that right, Lucas?
Yeah, so this may be related to the fuel gas for electricity in section B2,
Yeah.
either for data center or uh, electricity export to the grid. So I believe so. The electricity can still be a product and with the high performance benchmark. So if I think maybe the difference would be there won't be federal fuel charge for the smaller facilities, or it won't be if the facilities are small enough, they won't be required to report in the large emitter program either. So so I believe the associated emissions from these volumes are can still be kept in 2026. So not much change regarding the electricity components.
Great, thanks. Can the submission related to removing facilities for 2026 due by December 1st be revised to incorporate any divestiture activities occurring later in December that may materially affect the original content? How should this be handled? So basically, the facilities can be added for 2025 still, but not removed. Any removal that you're requesting at this point would be for 2026, for the 2026 year, I believe, right?
So the deadline is set in the regulation for removal of facilities for 2026. So uh, we don't have a lot of wiggle room. Like if it's a couple of days, we may be able to, if it, before we get into the pile. But it's a regulated deadline, December 1st, 2025 for 2026 removal of facilities. Um, so if the facilities were divested uh, later in December 2025, and aggregate doesn't want to report on that for 2026, so that may be addressed with our end of year cleanup. So if it's early enough, before January 15th is finalized, if it's finalized in the Patronex data, when we pull the data to do the end of year cleanup, we see a mismatch in operatorship, we could kick those out, even if there was no removal request for those facilities divested in later in December after the December 1st deadline.
Okay, great. There's a question about the carbon price under tier for 2025. So that's $95 a ton. Um, For clarity, default option 1 units will be assigned by facility subtype in the new FSB approach. Is there any option to apply for alternative units by subtype, and if so, any unit available to any subtype, or will there be limitations by subtype? So this is, I think, speaking to our default unit types by facility subtype.
Yeah, I believe so. So facilities can still submit their own FSB applications or just a benchmark unit, change of benchmark unit request without a full FSB application, for example. I think in the slide we intentionally said the default would be those units for each facility type. However, if there are major differences that are demonstrated, we could consider other units as well, be it option 1 default units or perhaps some other units that may work better. But in most cases, the option 1 units, excluding the low emitting facilities, would be applicable.
Okay. Could you please summarize the changes for 2025 if an operator decides to stay for a full year? Is zero emitting facility adjustment the only change?
So for 2025, even the zero emitting, I think the major change would be the zero emitting treatment will be implemented across all aggregates. But other than that, for 2025, we are still going to use ICAST over I, population adjustment, and so pretty much the only major change would be the zero emitting facility. The process itself is not changing much at all, but it will be implemented across the aggregates. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Is there any guidance from the CRA regarding the fuel charge? Should we expect any announcements from the CRA before December 1st? That would be a question for CRA. I don't think that we understand there to be any planned announcement of any kind. Hey, Lucas, I'm not seeing any questions in the hopper here. Maybe we can give it last chance for folks if they have.
Oh, a couple more just came in. If you click publish and then go back to in review, it may refresh.
I see. Okay, if a company has a higher annual carbon intensity during Q1 versus the rest of the year, what prior year benchmark should be used for comparison for partial 2025 report period? Does the benchmark remain an annual prior year benchmark, or is a comparative prior year benchmark, or a comparative prior year period as the 2025 partial report period? The intention is to use the full year historic data for the purposes of part year reporting, rather than some other period. Can the department briefly comment on the CCS EOR offset protocol requirements to have CO2 sourced from a regulated facility? Would aggregate or other tier designation be required to generate offsets from aggregate eligible facilities, or would the department be allowing non-regulated CO2 to be offset eligible under both protocols? So the intention behind requiring the CO2 to come from a regulated facility under the CCS and the EOR protocols is essentially to maintain the output-based construct for the program, and so that'll, I think, remain a requirement under the two protocols. I guess the exception to that would be direct air capture, which is contemplated to be an activity which could happen within the boundaries of the offset projects. If you have any other questions on that, feel free to drop us a line. Will you be providing a summary of the Q&A today with the session materials? I think we probably could. I think that there is some summary available through Teams, so I think we could probably include that. And again, we're looking to publish the recording of the session. To confirm, proposed changes for 2026 are to include low-emitting facility production data, still including emissions data, and remove non-Petronex fuels. I think that's a good high-level summary. If you include also the FSB assignment by facility type, that probably covers the main elements for 2026. Has the department modeled the anticipated impact of this FSB change to the existing oversupply and depressed secondary market pricing of offsets EPCs in the Alberta tier market? So I think what I would say is like we would anticipate that these changes probably still allow for a similar amount of EPCs to be requested as we saw in 2024. But I think they help to prevent a significant expansion of those EPC requests that might occur if people were, I'm going to say, optimizing their aggregate populations. For the 2026 FSB calculations, will different facility types have distinct reference years for benchmarking, or will the same reference years apply to all facility types? I think the intention is to maintain a single set of reference years for all the facility types within the aggregates. Is that correct, Lucas?
Yeah, that would work better, I believe, because given the 500 E3M3 threshold that's applied to all the facilities, typically that would indicate that all the facilities in the reference years should have data to be able to part of the benchmarking. So that means the same set of reference years would likely work. But if it doesn't, we are willing to have further conversation and see how to better treat different facility groups. Yeah.
So this is an important clarification for people probably. So if we choose to opt out for 2026 and later decide to opt in again by enrolling these facilities in a new aggregate, which reference years would apply? Would the original reference years still be used, or would more recent ones be established?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. So what we said in the slide was that if the same set of facilities are re-enrolled, basically the same old aggregates are re-enrolled, or a smaller part of the old aggregate are enrolled, so a subset of that previous aggregate that was revoked, and then later on those facilities or part of the facilities in the previous aggregate were re-enrolled, the original reference years are likely still acceptable. So the intention, I think, is to maintain the signal. So since the original program was kicked in 2020, so yeah.
If the FSB is based on disposition, will the adjustments related to zero emitting facilities be made within the benchmark value itself this year to get exact clarity on credits received? So yes, that's the intention, is that the benchmark setting for 2025 would consider the zero emitting facilities as outlined in the presentation in the setting of the benchmark for 2025. Okay, I think that's it.
Yeah, I don't see any new questions at this moment.
Okay, well, we'd very much like to thank everyone for their attendance and interest this morning, and we'll look to get materials posted as soon as we can from the webinar that we've done today, so that they can hopefully help inform any input that you might have to submit for us as we look to finalize our benchmark standard. And we are looking to publish that benchmark standard before the end of calendar year. Okay, thanks so much, Lucas and team.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.